In the darkest days of World War II, a single promise ignited hope in a defeated nation. "I shall return," vowed General Douglas MacArthur, as the Philippines fell under Japanese control. It was a bold declaration, one that seemed impossible amidst relentless setbacks. Yet, this promise became the rallying cry for an epic comeback that would turn the tide of the Pacific War. What drove MacArthur to such audacity, and how did his return reshape history? This is the story of a pledge that defied all odds. Before we continue, friends, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It takes just a second for you, but it gives me incredible motivation to keep creating these videos. I'd also greatly appreciate your comments. Thank you for your support. And now, let's dive back into the story. On the sun-baked shores of Corregidor in early 1942, amidst the thunder of artillery and the suffocating weight of defeat, a promise was born. It was a vow that transcended strategy and logistics, echoing deeply into the hearts of both soldiers and civilians. "I shall return." General Douglas MacArthur, standing tall despite the crushing blow of retreat, uttered these words as he was evacuated from the Philippines under orders from Washington. For the people left behind, and for the soldiers who faced the grim reality of Japanese occupation, his promise was more than words. It was hope. MacArthur's departure symbolized the nadir of the Allied campaign in the Pacific. The Japanese juggernaut had swept across Southeast Asia with unrelenting speed, and the fall of the Philippines dealt a severe blow to Allied morale. The defeat at Bataan and Corregidor marked not just the loss of key territories, but the suffering of thousands who were left to endure the brutal Bataan Death March or life under occupation. Yet, amidst the despair, MacArthur's promise became a rallying cry for the resistance, a beacon for the Allied forces regrouping to strike back. By 1942, the strategic importance of the Philippines was irrefutable. Lying at the crossroads of vital maritime routes, the archipelago was the key to controlling the Western Pacific. Its loss had given Japan a fortified bastion from which they could threaten Australia, consolidate their Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, and disrupt Allied supply lines. But the Japanese conquest came at a cost. Their resources were stretched thin, and local resistance simmered fiercely. The American defeat in the Philippines forced a reevaluation of strategy. Initially caught off guard by Japan's aggressive expansion, the United States adopted a methodical approach to reclaim the Pacific. Central to this strategy was the island-hopping campaign, designed to bypass heavily fortified Japanese strongholds, seize critical positions, and gradually isolate the enemy's forces. General MacArthur was repositioned to Australia, where he would build the foundation for his long-awaited return. In Australia, MacArthur began his work with urgency. With the support of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, MacArthur established his command headquarters in Brisbane. The cooperation of the Australian government and its military proved essential. The Allies faced logistical challenges on an unprecedented scale. Coordinating reinforcements, supplies, and intelligence across vast distances required precision and unity. Australian and British contributions to intelligence, particularly in breaking Japanese codes, provided critical insights that would shape future operations. As the groundwork for his promise was laid, MacArthur's focus never wavered. His connection to the Filipino people, shaped by years spent in the islands before the war, gave him a personal stake in their liberation. His promise to return was not just a matter of military necessity. It was a deeply personal mission. While the broader Allied strategy was shaped by the likes of Admiral Chester W. Nimitz in the Central Pacific, MacArthur's Southwest Pacific campaign would ensure that the Philippines remained a primary objective. In every decision he made, the general's steely resolve reflected his conviction. The liberation of the Philippines was not just a goal, it was a duty. The stage was set, and the groundwork for MacArthur's return had begun. The rivalry between General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester W. Nimitz defined the Allied strategy in the Pacific theater. MacArthur, a man of towering ego and unyielding determination, saw the Philippines not just as a strategic target, but as a personal and moral crusade. He argued vehemently that reclaiming the archipelago was essential to dismantling Japan's control over Southeast Asia and fulfilling the United States' obligations to its Filipino allies. To MacArthur, bypassing the Philippines, as Nimitz proposed, was tantamount to abandoning its people, a betrayal of his promise. Nimitz, by contrast, was a calculated and pragmatic leader, focused on efficiency and minimizing losses. His proposed Central Pacific strategy sought to target key islands that would provide a direct pathway to Japan's home islands. These positions would enable the establishment of airfields and bases for sustained bombing campaigns, while avoiding unnecessary entanglements. Nimitz viewed MacArthur's obsession with the Philippines as an emotional distraction that risked diverting resources from the ultimate objective, defeating Japan. Their personalities only deepened the divide. Where MacArthur was charismatic and often dramatic, Nimitz was reserved, preferring quiet, methodical planning. Both men's strengths and flaws were reflected in their strategies, and their disagreements required careful mediation by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who ultimately opted for a compromise: the simultaneous advancement of both campaigns. Operation Cartwheel exemplified the scale of the logistical challenges facing the Allies in the Pacific. The campaign, aimed at neutralizing the Japanese stronghold of Rabaul, required the coordination of vast numbers of troops, supplies, and equipment over immense distances. One of the most significant hurdles was the transport of reinforcements and supplies through waters infested with Japanese submarines and aircraft. Convoys often arrived delayed, and some ships were lost to enemy action, such as the torpedoing of the SS Port Hunter, a key supply ship carrying ammunition. Additionally, New Guinea's dense jungles and treacherous mountain ranges made overland transport nearly impossible. Roads turned into quagmires under relentless tropical rains, and hastily constructed airstrips were frequently rendered unusable by flooding. The Allies relied heavily on Australian and British contributions to overcome these challenges. Australian forces, particularly the 7th and 9th Divisions, played a critical role in ground operations in New Guinea, engaging in brutal jungle warfare to secure key positions. Australian officers like General Sir Thomas Blamey, though sometimes at odds with MacArthur, provided indispensable leadership in coordinating local efforts. Meanwhile, British intelligence operatives stationed in India and Southeast Asia provided crucial insights into Japanese troop movements. Figures such as British Major General William Slim, though primarily engaged in the Burma campaign, ensured that intelligence resources were shared across theaters, aiding the overall Allied effort. The internal resistance within the Philippines was another vital component of the campaign's groundwork. Filipino guerrilla groups, such as Balahap, Hukbo Bayan Laban Sa Hapon, waged a relentless insurgency against Japanese forces. They sabotaged supply lines, conducted ambushes, and provided intelligence to Allied commanders. Leaders like Luis Turuk, who commanded Balahap forces in Luzon, maintained communication with American operatives despite the immense risks. Allied submarines and clandestine airdrops supplied the guerrillas with weapons and ammunition, strengthening their ability to harass the occupying forces. The resistance's courage kept the Japanese off balance and provided critical intelligence that shaped the Allies' approach to the liberation campaign. By mid-1944, these combined efforts brought the Allies to the threshold of MacArthur's long-awaited return to the Philippines. Operation Cartwheel had successfully neutralized Rabaul, and MacArthur's forces stood ready to launch their invasion of Leyte. The logistical triumphs and sacrifices of the past year demonstrated the resilience and ingenuity of the Allied forces. The guerrillas' unyielding defiance, combined with the collaboration of Australian, British, and American forces, had set the stage for the fulfillment of MacArthur's promise. The Philippine campaign was no longer a question of if, but when, and the general was determined to ensure that the answer would come soon. Douglas MacArthur's leadership was a blend of brilliance, drama, and iron-willed authority. While his strategic insights were often pivotal, his authoritarian approach to command led to both triumphs and tensions. Known for his intolerance of dissent, MacArthur ruled his staff and forces with an uncompromising hand, frequently pushing his subordinates to their limits. His demanding leadership style produced results, but also left a trail of strained relationships and moments of open conflict. One telling episode of MacArthur's authoritarianism occurred during the New Guinea campaign. Frustrated by delays in advancing toward Japanese positions at Buna, MacArthur issued orders that disregarded his field commander's assessments of the terrain. General Edwin Harding, who commanded American forces, faced near-impossible conditions: dense jungles, swampy ground, and entrenched Japanese defenses. When progress slowed, MacArthur publicly criticized Harding, claiming that the delays stemmed from a lack of aggressiveness. Ignoring logistical and environmental realities, MacArthur relieved Harding of command, replacing him with General Robert Eichelberger. MacArthur's instructions to Eichelberger were chillingly direct: take Buna, Bob, or don't come back alive. The order, while stark, reflected his ruthless determination to achieve results at any cost. MacArthur's clashes were not limited to subordinates. His disputes with Admiral Ernest J. King were equally fiery. King, a sharp-tongued and combative leader, often clashed with MacArthur over resource allocation. One of their most heated disputes arose when MacArthur demanded additional amphibious landing craft for his campaign in the Southwest Pacific. King, prioritizing operations in the Central Pacific, refused, arguing that the overall strategy required equal focus on both theaters. Their arguments often escalated into personal attacks, with King referring to MacArthur as a prima donna, while MacArthur dismissed King as a narrow-minded sailor. These clashes revealed not just strategic differences, but the strong personalities of both men, whose mutual disdain complicated Allied coordination. Despite these tensions, MacArthur's tactical innovations during the New Guinea campaign demonstrated his adaptability and ingenuity. Confronted with Japanese forces entrenched in nearly impenetrable jungle terrain, MacArthur's commanders developed new methods of warfare. One such tactic involved leapfrogging, bypassing heavily fortified positions to attack softer targets and sever supply lines. At Buna, coordinated use of air support and artillery neutralized Japanese strongpoints, while engineers built temporary bridges to move heavy equipment through swamps. The introduction of flamethrowers and close air support revolutionized the clearing of bunkers and jungle fortifications, giving Allied forces a decisive edge. The atmosphere within MacArthur's headquarters was a reflection of the man himself. Intense, disciplined, and unyielding, staff officers worked under immense pressure, knowing that the slightest mistake could provoke MacArthur's ire. General Richard Sutherland, MacArthur's chief of staff, bore the brunt of his superior's demands, acting as both executor of orders and buffer for the rest of the staff. Sutherland's loyalty to MacArthur was unshakable, though it often made him the target of resentment among other officers who felt the general's criticisms were unwarranted or unfair. Despite the tension, the staff shared a collective belief in the mission, driven by MacArthur's unwavering vision and their desire to fulfill his promise to the Filipino people. PSYOPs, psychological operations, were another key element of MacArthur's campaign. His team crafted a series of radio broadcasts directed at Filipino resistance fighters, delivering messages of hope and solidarity. In one particularly memorable transmission, MacArthur assured the guerrillas, "The tide is turned. Stand firm. The day of liberation is near." These broadcasts, combined with clandestine supply drops of weapons and medical aid, sustained the morale of Filipino fighters who faced relentless Japanese reprisals. MacArthur also worked to establish direct contacts with local leaders, dispatching emissaries to build trust and lay the groundwork for future cooperation. He understood that the support of the Filipino people would be as critical to victory as military strength. By the end of the New Guinea campaign, MacArthur's forces had proven their ability to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. The general's leadership, though divisive, had delivered results, and his troops were now poised for the next phase of their mission, the liberation of the Philippines. The victories in New Guinea, achieved through a combination of tactical innovation, relentless determination, and the sacrifices of countless soldiers, brought MacArthur closer to fulfilling the promise that had defined his career. The liberation of Leyte marked the beginning of the most decisive phase in General Douglas MacArthur's campaign to reclaim the Philippines. The operation was vast in scope and ambition, involving thousands of soldiers, sailors, and airmen from across the Allied forces. It was a moment that would not only shape the outcome of the war in the Pacific, but also fulfill MacArthur's long-anticipated promise to the Filipino people. Every detail of the invasion was meticulously planned, yet the success of the operation hung in a precarious balance. Leyte held immense strategic significance. Situated at the heart of the Philippine archipelago, it provided a critical foothold for advancing deeper into the islands. For the Japanese, it was a linchpin in their defensive network, a position they could not afford to lose. For the Allies, seizing Leyte would mean disrupting Japanese supply lines, cutting off reinforcements, and opening the door to Manila. The stakes could not have been higher, and both sides prepared for a confrontation of unprecedented scale. The invasion fleet assembled for Leyte was one of the largest in history, a testament to the Allied commitment to the campaign. Nearly 700 ships, including battleships, aircraft carriers, and amphibious landing craft, converged on the island. The naval force was spearheaded by Admiral William Bull Halsey's Third Fleet, which provided vital air cover and naval gunfire support. Thousands of soldiers from the Sixth Army, under the command of Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, prepared to storm Leyte's beaches. Their mission: establish a beachhead, secure key positions, and push inland to dislodge the Japanese defenders. On October 20th, 1944, as dawn broke over the Leyte Gulf, the invasion began. Allied warships unleashed a ferocious bombardment on Japanese positions along the coast, filling the air with the deafening roar of naval artillery. The beaches of Leyte were transformed into infernos as shells and rockets pounded enemy fortifications. Landing craft swarmed toward the shore, carrying waves of American soldiers braced for combat. To their surprise, initial resistance was minimal. The Japanese defenders, caught off guard by the scale and ferocity of the assault, had retreated inland to regroup. The first waves of troops disembarked with relative ease, quickly securing the beaches and moving to establish supply lines. As the soldiers advanced inland, they encountered a warm and emotional welcome from the local population. Filipino civilians, many of whom had endured years of Japanese occupation, greeted the troops with tears and cheers. Some provided valuable intelligence on Japanese troop movements, while others offered their labor to assist with supply logistics. These acts of support underscored the deep connection between the Filipino people and the American forces, a bond that MacArthur had worked tirelessly to foster. For the civilians, the sight of Allied soldiers on Leyte's shores symbolized the long-awaited liberation of their homeland. At the center of the action stood MacArthur himself, ever conscious of the symbolic weight of his presence. Escorted by a small contingent of staff and soldiers, he waded ashore at Red Beach in Palo, Leyte, in one of the most iconic moments of the war. Photographers and cameramen captured the scene as MacArthur declared, "I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil." His words reverberated far beyond the shores of Leyte, inspiring hope among the Filipino resistance and rallying Allied morale. The moment was as much a triumph of psychology as it was of strategy, solidifying MacArthur's role as a symbol of resilience and determination. While the initial landing was successful, the challenges ahead were daunting. The terrain of Leyte was unforgiving, with dense jungles, muddy rivers, and steep hills providing natural defenses for the Japanese forces. The enemy, though temporarily disoriented, quickly regrouped and began counterattacking with ferocity. Japanese troops dug into defensive positions, turning villages and hills into fortresses. Allied forces faced the dual challenge of overcoming these defenses while maintaining supply lines through treacherous terrain. The role of Allied air and naval forces proved critical in countering these challenges. Carrier-based aircraft launched relentless strikes on Japanese supply lines, targeting transport convoys and troop reinforcements attempting to reach Leyte. Meanwhile, Naval bombardments continued to suppress Japanese strongpoints, providing crucial support for ground operations. The coordination between land, sea, and air forces was a testament to the sophistication of the Allied war machine, a level of integration that the Japanese struggled to match. The Battle of Leyte marked a turning point not just in the campaign for the Philippines, but in the Pacific War as a whole. It demonstrated the overwhelming power of the Allied coalition, the resilience of its soldiers, and the indomitable will of a leader who refused to abandon his promise. For MacArthur, stepping onto Leyte's shores was more than a military achievement. It was a fulfillment of a vow that had come to define his leadership and legacy. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was a desperate, sprawling conflict orchestrated by Japan as part of Operation Shogo 1, Victory Operation, a last-ditch effort to crush the Allied invasion of the Philippines and turn the tide of the war. The operation embodied both the audacity and the weaknesses of Japan's strategic thinking at this stage in the war. With its navy battered and resources stretched thin, Japan relied on an ambitious, multi-pronged plan designed to split the Allied fleet, lure away their air support, and strike a decisive blow. Operation Shogo 1 centered on a three-pronged attack. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, composed of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, would push through the San Bernardino Strait to attack the vulnerable landing beaches on Leyte. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura and Vice Admiral Kohide Shima would lead the southern force through the Surigao Strait to converge with Kurita on Leyte Gulf. The third element, a northern force of decoy carriers under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, would lure Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet away from the beaches, exposing them to the other attacks. It was a daring strategy that relied heavily on coordination and timing, but the plan's complexity and the Allies' superior intelligence capabilities left it riddled with vulnerabilities. Allied codebreakers played a pivotal role in exposing the Japanese plan. By intercepting and deciphering Japanese communications, the Allies gained insight into the scope and timing of the operation. Units like the code-breaking team at Station HYPO, led by Commander Joseph Rockefort earlier in the war, had laid the foundation for understanding Japanese naval movements. Specific to Leyte Gulf, Allied intelligence pinpointed Korea's departure from Brunei Bay and tracked his force through the Palawan Passage, allowing American submarines Darter and Dace to ambush Kurita on October 23rd. The sinking of his flagship, Atago, and the heavy cruiser Maya not only delayed Kurita, but also threw his command into disarray. This early blow demonstrated how intelligence could directly shape the battlefield, giving the Allies a critical edge. One of the most harrowing and heroic episodes of the battle unfolded off the coast of Samar, where Kurita's center force, after a grueling journey through the sea beyond sea, unexpectedly encountered the lightly armed task unit Taffy 3. Composed of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts, Taffy 3 was ill-equipped to face Kurita's force, which included the massive battleships Yamato and Kongo. Despite this, the outnumbered Americans mounted a tenacious defense that would become legendary. The destroyer USS Johnston, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans, led the charge. Evans, a part Cherokee naval officer, was known for his unyielding courage and had once vowed never to retreat in the face of the enemy. True to his word, Evans ordered the Johnston to launch a torpedo attack on Kurita's battleships, drawing their fire and allowing the escort carriers to reposition. The Johnston inflicted significant damage before being overwhelmed. Survivors recalled Evans manning a deck gun even as his ship sank, a testament to his unwavering leadership. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Another destroyer, the USS Hull, commanded by Commander Leon S. Kintberger, also sacrificed itself to protect the carriers. The Hull launched its torpedoes at enemy cruisers, disrupting their formation, and continued firing its guns until it was torn apart by Japanese fire. These ships, along with others like the destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, fought with unparalleled bravery, earning Taffy 3 the nickname, the Little Fleet That Could. Their actions not only delayed Kurita, but also convinced him that he was facing a much larger force, leading to his eventual withdrawal. The battle also saw the chilling debut of the kamikaze, a tactic born from Japan's increasing desperation. On October 25th, waves of kamikaze pilots targeted Allied ships, marking the beginning of a campaign that would terrorize the Pacific theater. One of the first victims was the escort carrier USS St. Lo, struck by a kamikaze that triggered catastrophic explosions, sinking the ship. For Allied sailors, the kamikaze attacks introduced a new and deeply unsettling dimension to the war. Unlike conventional aerial assaults, the deliberate sacrifice of pilots created a psychological toll. Survivors described the horror of watching planes dive toward them with no intention of veering away. The kamikaze's fanaticism left a lasting impression, forcing Allied commanders to adapt their air defenses and reinforce anti-aircraft capabilities. The aftermath of Leyte Gulf revealed the devastating consequences for Japan. The Imperial Navy lost 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers, losses it could not replace. The Allies, though victorious, suffered significant damage and casualties, including over 1,000 sailors killed. More importantly, the battle eliminated Japan's ability to conduct major naval operations, effectively ceding control of the Pacific to the Allies. Leyte Gulf also underscored the dominance of air power in modern naval warfare, as carriers, rather than battleships, proved decisive. For the Allies, the victory solidified their hold on Leyte, ensuring a steady flow of supplies and reinforcements for the continued liberation of the Philippines. The triumph boosted morale and demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated air, sea, and land operations. For Japan, the loss was catastrophic, not only in terms of material but also in morale, as the myth of the invincible Imperial Navy was shattered. Strategically, Leyte Gulf marked the beginning of the end for Japanese resistance in the Pacific, paving the way for the eventual invasion of the Japanese home islands. The victory at Leyte Gulf did not mark the end of the campaign for the Philippines, but the beginning of a grueling and bloody effort to liberate the archipelago. Central to this stage were the islands of Samar and Mindanao, where fierce jungle warfare, significant contributions from the Filipino resistance, and MacArthur's continued political and military leadership would come to define the next phase of the conflict. After securing Leyte, Allied forces turned their attention to Samar, a rugged island of strategic importance due to its proximity to Leyte and its potential as a staging ground for further advances. The Japanese defenders had retreated into the mountainous jungle terrain, preparing for a protracted defense. The geography of Samar, dense forests, steep ridges, and labyrinthine river systems, posed significant challenges to the advancing troops. The U.S. Sixth Army, under the command of General Walter Kruger, faced not only entrenched enemy positions, but also the unforgiving environment, where diseases like malaria claimed as many casualties as combat. The fighting on Samar was marked by a coordinated effort with Filipino guerrilla forces, who had been actively resisting Japanese occupation since 1942. These local fighters provided vital intelligence on enemy movements, guided Allied units through the difficult terrain, and conducted sabotage operations behind Japanese lines. One notable guerrilla leader was Colonel Ruperto Canglian, a former officer in the Philippine Army who had become a key figure in the resistance. Canglian's forces disrupted Japanese supply lines and relayed critical information to Allied commanders, accelerating the campaign's progress. MacArthur, always attuned to the political significance of such partnerships, emphasized the importance of recognizing the guerrillas as integral to the liberation effort, a move that further bolstered his image among the Filipino population. As Samar was being cleared, attention shifted to the much larger and more populous island of Mindanao, a vital stepping stone for the eventual drive to Manila. Mindanao's significance lay not only in its strategic location, but also in its resources, particularly its agricultural output, which Japan had relied on to support its war effort. The Japanese defense strategy on Mindanao mirrored their approach elsewhere: retreat into the jungle and fortify key positions, turning natural features into formidable strongholds. The result was a series of brutal confrontations as Allied forces sought to dislodge these well-prepared defenders. The X-Corps, tasked with liberating Mindanao, employed innovative tactics developed during earlier campaigns in the Pacific. These included jungle warfare units trained specifically to operate in tropical environments, as well as the use of amphibious assaults to outflank enemy positions. One such operation was a landing at Parang, where American forces bypassed heavily defended coastal areas to strike deeper into the Japanese-held interior. These maneuvers, combined with relentless air support, gradually wore down the defenders, though progress was slow and casualties high. Throughout this phase, the role of Filipino resistance fighters remained indispensable. On Mindanao, guerrilla groups not only engaged in direct combat, but also rescued American prisoners of war and civilians interned by the Japanese. In one dramatic instance, a combined Allied and guerrilla operation liberated hundreds of POWs from a camp in Davao, a mission that underscored the deep collaboration between local fighters and the advancing U.S. forces. These actions strengthened the moral resolve of both the Allies and the Filipino populace, reinforcing the perception of the campaign as a joint struggle for freedom. As the liberation of Samar and Mindanao unfolded, MacArthur continued to assert his role as not just a military commander, but a political leader. He made a point of meeting with local officials and community leaders, emphasizing the Allies' commitment to Filipino sovereignty. These interactions often took on a symbolic dimension, with MacArthur presenting himself as a fulfillment of his famous promise, a savior returning to deliver his people from tyranny. While this approach endeared him to many, it also drew criticism from some Allied officials, who viewed his actions as overly theatrical and self-serving. The Japanese, meanwhile, sought to regroup and intensify their resistance. Recognizing the importance of Mindanao, they funneled reinforcements to the island, including experienced units withdrawn from other fronts. However, their logistical capabilities were severely compromised by the Allied blockade, which prevented the resupply of isolated garrisons. Cut off and increasingly desperate, Japanese commanders resorted to suicidal counterattacks, including banzai charges that inflicted significant casualties but ultimately failed to halt the Allied advance. The liberation of Central Philippines came at a heavy cost. The harsh conditions, combined with the ferocity of the Japanese defense, resulted in thousands of Allied casualties, both combat-related and from diseases like dengue fever and dysentery. For the Filipino population, the price was even higher, as entire villages were destroyed during the fighting, and civilians were often caught in the crossfire or targeted by retreating Japanese forces. Despite these hardships, the campaign achieved its objectives, paving the way for the eventual assault on Manila and the complete liberation of the Philippines. The victories on Samar and Mindanao were more than just military achievements. They symbolized the resilience and determination of the Allied forces and their Filipino partners. For MacArthur, they represented another step toward fulfilling his promise, reinforcing his image as the architect of liberation. However, the battles also highlighted the staggering human cost of the campaign, a sobering reminder of the sacrifices required to reclaim the islands from Japanese control. As the Allies prepared for the final push toward Manila, the stage was set for one of the most grueling and devastating battles of the Pacific War. As Allied forces moved toward Manila, the campaign transitioned into one of the most intense and devastating urban battles of the Pacific War. The fight for the capital, once known as the Pearl of the Orient, would pit the resolute Allied advance against an increasingly desperate Japanese defense. The ensuing conflict would highlight both the heroism and tragedy of war, as well as the enduring resilience of the Filipino people. The Japanese defense of Manila had been planned as a brutal and uncompromising last stand. General Tomoiki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, had ordered his main forces to retreat into the mountains of northern Luzon, preferring to wage guerrilla warfare from remote strongholds. However, Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi, commanding the remaining Japanese Navy forces in the city, refused to abandon Manila. He resolved to fight to the last man, turning the capital into a fortress. Approximately 16,000 Japanese troops, supplemented by naval personnel, fortified key positions throughout the city, including the historic intramurals or walled city, government buildings, and key infrastructure like bridges and power plants. The Japanese strategy in Manila involved transforming the urban environment into a death trap for the advancing Allied forces. Streets were mined, buildings were rigged with explosives, and sniper positions were established in ruined structures. Civilian hostages were often used as human shields, while key thoroughfares were barricaded to slow the Allied advance. The intent was not merely to delay, but to maximize Allied and civilian casualties. This scorched-earth approach ensured that the battle for Manila would be fought with unprecedented ferocity. American forces, under the command of Major General Robert Baitler and Major General Oscar Griswold, began their assault on the city in early February 1945. The 37th Infantry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division spearheaded the advance, encountering fierce resistance almost immediately. The Santa Ana district became the first major flashpoint, with street-to-street fighting that showcased the challenges of urban warfare. Tanks proved invaluable for breaching fortified positions, but the dense urban environment often left them vulnerable to ambushes. Infantry units had to clear buildings room by room, a process that was slow, exhausting, and fraught with danger. One of the most infamous episodes of the battle occurred during the assault on the University of Santo Tomas, which had been repurposed by the Japanese as an internment camp for Allied civilians. As American troops approached, the Japanese began executing prisoners, a massacre that was only halted by the rapid advance of American forces who stormed the compound. The liberation of Santo Tomas became a rallying point for Allied troops, galvanizing their resolve to liberate the rest of the city despite the horrors they witnessed. Meanwhile, Filipino resistance fighters played a critical role in supporting the Allied advance. Operating in small, highly mobile units, they provided invaluable intelligence on Japanese positions, sabotaged supply lines, and launched their own attacks on enemy forces. The bravery of these guerrillas, often armed with little more than captured rifles or homemade explosives, significantly disrupted Japanese operations and saved countless lives. In some cases, resistance fighters led Allied units through secret routes into the city, bypassing heavily fortified areas. The battle reached its crescendo with the assault on Intramuros, a centuries-old walled district that had become the epicenter of Japanese resistance. The area's thick stone walls, originally built to withstand cannon fire, proved formidable against even modern artillery. To minimize Allied casualties, the decision was made to use heavy bombardments, including naval gunfire from Manila Bay, to breach the defenses. However, this approach came at a terrible cost to the city's historic architecture and civilian population. Inside Intramuros, the fighting reached an almost medieval intensity. Japanese troops, knowing they were surrounded, fought with a ferocity that shocked even the battle-hardened Allied troops. Flamethrowers and satchel charges became essential tools for clearing bunkers and tunnels, while infantry units faced constant attacks from hidden snipers and suicide charges. Despite their overwhelming numerical and material superiority, Allied forces took heavy casualties during the assault. The liberation of Intramuros also revealed the horrifying extent of Japanese atrocities. Thousands of civilians, many of them women and children, were massacred during the final days of the battle. Entire families were slaughtered, and survivors told harrowing stories of systematic executions, rapes, and torture. The Manila Massacre, as it came to be known, remains one of the darkest chapters of the war in the Pacific. The Allied troops who discovered the aftermath of these atrocities were profoundly affected, with many vowing to exact justice on the battlefield. Throughout the battle, acts of heroism abounded on both the Allied and Filipino sides. One notable example was Captain Alfredo M. Santos, a Filipino officer who led his unit in a daring assault on a Japanese artillery position that had been shelling civilian areas. Despite being outnumbered, Santos and his men captured the position, saving hundreds of lives and earning him a place among the heroes of the campaign. As the battle drew to a close, the city of Manila lay in ruins. Once a vibrant metropolis and cultural hub, It had been reduced to rubble by weeks of relentless combat. The destruction was nearly total, with key landmarks like the Manila Cathedral and Malacanang Palace heavily damaged or destroyed. The cost in human lives was staggering. An estimated 100,000 Filipino civilians perished, along with thousands of Japanese defenders and Allied troops. For many, the price of liberation felt unbearably high. Despite the devastation, the liberation of Manila was a significant strategic and symbolic victory. It marked the collapse of Japanese control over the Philippines and dealt a severe blow to their ability to resist the Allied advance in the Pacific. For MacArthur, the retaking of the capital was a deeply personal moment, fulfilling his promise to return and liberate the Filipino people. Standing amid the ruins of the city, he declared, "We have returned as we promised, to restore your freedom." The battle for Manila also had profound implications for the post-war reconstruction of the Philippines. The scale of the destruction underscored the need for significant international aid, while the atrocities committed during the battle galvanized support for Filipino independence. For the Allied forces, the battle provided valuable lessons in urban warfare, shaping their approach to future operations in the Pacific. The liberation of Manila stands as a testament to the courage and resilience of those who fought and suffered through its horrors. It was a victory born of immense sacrifice, one that forever changed the lives of those who experienced it and the history of the Philippines. As the Allies turned their attention to the final stages of the campaign, the memory of Manila would remain a powerful reminder of both the cost and the value of freedom. As the battle for Manila drew to a close, the focus of the Allied campaign shifted to the remaining Japanese strongholds scattered across the Philippine archipelago. Despite the significant losses they had already suffered, the Japanese forces demonstrated unwavering resistance, forcing Allied commanders to engage in a series of grueling operations to secure complete control of the islands. These final battles revealed the enduring complexity of the campaign and the human cost of liberating the Philippines. The mountainous terrain of Luzon became the next theater of intense combat. Japanese forces, led by General Tomoyuki Yamashita, had retreated into the rugged mountain ranges of northern Luzon, establishing a network of fortified positions. Yamashita, known for his strategic acumen, adopted a defensive strategy aimed at prolonging the conflict and tying down Allied resources. This guerrilla-style resistance forced American and Filipino troops to adapt their tactics to the unforgiving terrain. In some cases, entire infantry divisions were assigned to clear a single mountain stronghold, a task that often took weeks of relentless fighting. The capture of Baguio, Yamashita's de facto headquarters, was a pivotal moment in the Luzon campaign. American forces, supported by Filipino guerrilla fighters, advanced through the dense forest and steep inclines under heavy fire. The use of artillery was limited by the terrain, making close-quarters combat the norm. The eventual fall of Baguio in April 1945 marked the collapse of organized Japanese resistance in the region, but Yamashita and his remaining forces continued to fight on in isolated pockets. In parallel, the Allied forces launched operations to secure the southern islands of the Philippines, including Mindanao. Unlike Luzon, where formal military engagements dominated, the battles in Mindanao were characterized by a combination of jungle warfare and collaboration with local guerrilla forces. The 24th Infantry Division, under Major General Roscoe Woodruff, led the assault, facing fierce Japanese resistance. The swampy and forested terrain presented significant challenges, with soldiers battling not only the enemy but also tropical diseases, limited visibility, and logistical difficulties. The role of Filipino resistance fighters remained critical in these operations. Having gained invaluable experience during the years of Japanese occupation, guerrilla units provided detailed intelligence on enemy movements, sabotaged supply lines, and acted as guides for Allied troops. In many cases, their actions tipped the scales in favor of the Allies, enabling them to outmaneuver Japanese forces entrenched in difficult-to-access areas. Stories of bravery among these fighters, such as the daring rescue of Allied prisoners of war and civilians held by Japanese forces underscored their invaluable contribution to the campaign. One of the lesser-known but highly significant battles of this stage was the campaign for the Visayan Islands, a cluster of strategically important islands in the central Philippines. Japanese garrisons, isolated and cut off from reinforcements, resorted to scorched-earth tactics, destroying infrastructure and terrorizing the local population. The Allied response was swift and decisive, with amphibious landings supported by naval bombardments. The liberation of Cebu City, the economic and cultural heart of the Visayas, was a major milestone, achieved through a combination of airstrikes and coordinated ground assaults. Despite the challenges, the operation showcased the growing proficiency of Allied forces in joint amphibious and land operations. As the campaign progressed, the emphasis shifted to rebuilding and stabilizing liberated areas. The scale of devastation, particularly in Luzon and Manila, presented a daunting challenge for both military and civilian authorities. Roads, bridges, and ports had been systematically destroyed by retreating Japanese forces, hampering relief efforts. Allied engineers worked tirelessly to repair critical infrastructure, often under fire from remaining Japanese snipers. Local leaders, including President Sergio Osmeña, played a key role in coordinating reconstruction efforts and addressing the needs of displaced populations. MacArthur's presence during this phase of the campaign was emblematic of his broader role in the Philippines. He met with local leaders, attended ceremonies commemorating key victories, and personally inspected frontline positions. These gestures were not merely symbolic. They reinforced his commitment to the Filipino people and strengthened the partnership between the United States and the Philippines. However, his involvement also drew criticism, with some accusing him of prioritizing public appearances over operational efficiency. The campaign's final battles underscore the tenacity of Japanese forces, who continued to resist even as defeat became inevitable. On remote islands like Palawan and Mindoro, small Japanese garrisons fought to the last man, refusing to surrender despite being hopelessly outnumbered. These engagements, though smaller in scale, were no less intense than earlier battles. They also highlighted the psychological toll of the campaign, as Allied soldiers grappled with the relentless nature of their enemy's resistance. The conclusion of the Philippine campaign was marked by the surrender of Yamashita's forces in September 1945, following Japan's capitulation after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yamashita, who had commanded the defense of Luzon with remarkable discipline, was captured and later tried for war crimes. His trial and execution sparked controversy, with some arguing that he had been unfairly held responsible for atrocities committed by forces outside his direct command. The cost of liberating the Philippines was staggering. An estimated 1.1 million Filipinos, including civilians and guerrilla fighters, perished during the campaign. American forces suffered over 14,000 deaths and 48,000 wounded, while Japanese casualties exceeded 400,000. The human and material losses underscored the brutality of the Pacific War and the immense sacrifices made to secure victory. Despite these hardships, the liberation of the Philippines was a decisive moment in the Pacific War. It not only fulfilled MacArthur's promise to return, but also severed Japan's access to vital resources in Southeast Asia, hastening the collapse of their war effort. For the Filipino people, the campaign was both a triumph and a tragedy, symbolizing the end of years of oppression and the beginning of a new era of independence. As the Allies turned their attention to the final invasion of Japan, the lessons learned in the Philippines, particularly in jungle and urban warfare, shaped their strategic approach. The campaign's legacy, however, extended far beyond the battlefield. It reaffirmed the enduring bond between the United States and the Philippines, laying the foundation for a post-war partnership that would endure for decades. For MacArthur, the liberation of the Philippines was the crowning achievement of his career. His determination, leadership, and ability to inspire hope in the face of adversity cemented his place as one of the most iconic figures of the Second World War. Standing on the shores of Leyte, he had vowed to return, and he had kept his word. The conclusion of the Philippine Campaign marked a turning point not only in the Pacific War, but also in the history of the Philippines itself. The cost of the campaign was monumental, but its successes demonstrated the Allies' ability to recover from early setbacks and secure decisive victories in one of the most challenging theaters of World War II. As the dust settled, the world began to reckon with the campaign's far-reaching consequences. The scale of human and material losses was staggering. Allied forces sustained approximately 14,000 deaths and over 48,000 wounded, while Japanese casualties exceeded 400,000, including soldiers and civilians. For the Philippines, the toll was particularly severe, with an estimated 1.1 million Filipinos perishing during the campaign, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire or victims of Japanese reprisals. The near-total destruction of Manila, once hailed as the Pearl of the Orient, symbolized the heavy price of liberation. Its ruins testified to the ferocity of the urban combat and the human cost of war. Despite the devastation, the campaign reaffirmed the strategic importance of the Philippines in the Pacific theater. The liberation of the archipelago severed Japan's logistical links to Southeast Asia, cutting off vital resources such as oil, rubber, and minerals. It also provided the Allies with a critical staging ground for the anticipated invasion of Japan. Airfields and naval bases on Luzon and Leyte became indispensable for operations against the Japanese mainland, reinforcing the Philippines' role as the keystone of Allied strategy in the Pacific. For Japan, the loss of the Philippines was a crippling blow. The inability to defend such a vital territory exposed the limitations of Japan's overstretched military and the dwindling effectiveness of its naval and air forces. The defeat in the Philippines also marked a significant moral and psychological setback for the Japanese leadership, as it signaled the inevitability of further losses. With the Philippines secured, the Allies could intensify their attacks on Japan's home islands, bringing the war ever closer to Tokyo. The campaign also had profound implications for the Filipino people and their relationship with the United States. The end of Japanese occupation brought both relief and new challenges. While the promise of independence, enshrined in the Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934, remained a beacon of hope, the immediate task of rebuilding the war-torn nation took precedence. Infrastructure across the archipelago lay in ruins, agricultural production had plummeted, and the economy was in shambles. The Philippine government under President Sergio Osmeña faced a monumental challenge of restoring order and laying the groundwork for a stable post-war society. The partnership between the United States and the Philippines was a central theme in this reconstruction effort. American resources, expertise, and personnel played a crucial role in rebuilding key infrastructure, such as ports, bridges, and communication networks. The U.S. military government, led by General MacArthur, provided critical assistance in maintaining security and facilitating the transition to civilian governance. This collaboration, while essential, also underscored the complexities of Philippine-American relations, as some Filipino leaders questioned the long-term implications of continued American involvement in their nation's affairs. MacArthur himself emerged from the campaign as a polarizing figure. For many Filipinos, he was a hero who had kept his promise to return and liberate their homeland. His iconic phrase, "I have returned," became synonymous with resilience and triumph over adversity. Yet, his leadership style and decisions during the campaign drew criticism from some quarters. Critics pointed to his reluctance to delegate authority, his focus on personal legacy, and his contentious relationships with both subordinates and superiors. Nonetheless, his unwavering commitment to the Philippines cemented his legacy as one of the most influential figures in the nation's history. One of the most significant outcomes of the campaign was the resurgence of the Filipino independence movement. The years of occupation and the sacrifices made by Filipino guerrilla fighters had strengthened the resolve for self-determination. In 1946, just a year after the war ended, the Philippines achieved full independence, fulfilling a promise that had been delayed by the war. The events of the Philippine campaign played a crucial role in galvanizing this movement as they demonstrated the resilience and unity of the Filipino people in the face of adversity. The lessons of the Philippine campaign extended far beyond the archipelago. For the Allied forces, the campaign highlighted the importance of joint operations, the value of local intelligence and guerrilla warfare, and the challenges of urban and jungle combat. These lessons shaped the planning and execution of subsequent operations, including the invasions of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. The campaign also underscored the human cost of total war, prompting post-war efforts to establish international norms aimed at preventing similar devastation in the future. For historians and military strategists, the Philippine campaign remains a subject of enduring study and debate. It exemplifies the complexities of modern warfare, where strategy, logistics, and human resilience converge in ways that shape the course of history. The campaign's outcomes continue to resonate in the geopolitical and cultural relationship between the United States and the Philippines, serving as a reminder of the shared sacrifices and enduring bonds forged in the crucible of war. As the Pacific War approached its final stages, the liberation of the Philippines stood as a testament to the determination and cooperation of Allied forces. It was a campaign that demanded extraordinary sacrifices from all involved, yet it also reaffirmed the principles of freedom and self-determination. For the Filipino people, the campaign was both a culmination of their struggle against oppression and a prelude to a new chapter in their nation's history, one defined by independence, resilience, and the enduring legacy of those who had fought for their freedom. The fulfillment of General Douglas MacArthur's promise, "I shall return," marked a profound moment in history, not just for the Philippines but for the entire Pacific theater of World War II. The legacy of his return is multifaceted, encompassing military strategy, geopolitical shifts, and enduring cultural symbolism. This chapter delves into how MacArthur's actions and the campaign reshaped the world and left an indelible mark on global history. MacArthur's return fundamentally altered the trajectory of the Pacific War. The liberation of the Philippines was more than a military victory. It was a psychological triumph. It shattered Japan's hold over Southeast Asia, severing vital supply lines and reinforcing the Allies' dominance in the Pacific. The campaign demonstrated the importance of strategic resilience, coordination, and adaptability, providing a blueprint for future large-scale amphibious operations. For military historians, MacArthur's campaign is a study in overcoming adversity through determination and innovation. The promise, "I shall return," resonated deeply with the Filipino people, encapsulating their collective struggle for liberation and justice. This pledge was not just an oath. It was a beacon of hope during the darkest hours of Japanese occupation. For many Filipinos, MacArthur became a symbol of resilience and loyalty. His return was not merely a military maneuver. It was a moral victory that reaffirmed the value of steadfast commitment to allies. Culturally, MacArthur's promise became a cornerstone of Philippine-American relations. The campaign reinforced the United States' role as a liberator and partner, laying the groundwork for post-war cooperation. However, this legacy is complex, as it also highlighted the dependency of smaller nations on larger powers during times of crisis. The U.S. involvement in Philippine reconstruction and the eventual granting of independence in 1946 showcased the intricate dynamics of colonial history, liberation, and emerging sovereignty. The Pacific War and the Philippine campaign also illuminated the transformative power of leadership. MacArthur's strategic acumen, while polarizing, was undeniably effective. His ability to inspire loyalty among his troops and the Filipino people was a defining trait. Yet, his legacy is not without controversy. Critics argue that his decisions sometimes prioritize his personal vision over collective strategy, leading to unnecessary risks and friction with other Allied commanders. Nonetheless, his leadership in the Philippines cemented his place in history as one of the 20th century's most impactful military figures. The global implications of MacArthur's campaign extended beyond the battlefield. The liberation of the Philippines accelerated the decline of Japanese imperial ambitions and highlighted the shifting balance of power in Asia. It set the stage for post-war realignments, including the rise of the United States as a Pacific superpower. The campaign also underscored the critical role of regional partnerships, as seen in the collaboration between American, Australian, British, and Filipino forces. In contemporary times, MacArthur's promise and its fulfillment remain a source of inspiration. The Philippine campaign is commemorated through museums, memorials, and annual observances. In the Philippines, sites like Lady Landing Memorial Park serve as poignant reminders of the sacrifices made during the war. These commemorations not only honor the past, but also foster a sense of shared heritage and mutual respect between the Philippines and the United States. MacArthur's legacy extends to lessons in leadership and perseverance. His ability to overcome setbacks and galvanize support serves as a model for navigating crises in both military and civilian contexts. His story illustrates the importance of maintaining focus on long-term goals, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The broader narrative of the Philippine campaign also sheds light on the human cost of war and the resilience of those who endure it. The sacrifices made by soldiers, resistance fighters, and civilians underscore the enduring human capacity for courage and hope. These stories continue to inspire new generations to value peace, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. In conclusion, MacArthur's return to the Philippines was more than a military milestone. It was a defining moment in history that reshaped alliances, strategies, and cultural narratives. His promise, and the campaign that fulfilled it, continue to resonate as symbols of perseverance, leadership, and the enduring bonds between nations. As the Philippines and the world remember his legacy, the words, "I shall return," stand as a testament to the power of commitment and the enduring impact of a single promise. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps this community growing and motivates me to bring you more incredible stories.